All right, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to yet another installation of Project Blue's live chat series. Joining us today is Mike Getscher from the USS Iowa, a retired battleship in San Pedro turned museum. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, and we're glad you could join us. If you joined us before, welcome back. If you have any questions for Mike during the hour, please use the Q&A function located at the bottom of the Zoom page, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Before we get started, we have a couple of announcements, though. So on October 9th, we have a high-powered webinar with 3 of the world's top female ocean explorers focused on trailblazing in the ocean discovery and exploration fields. Panelists include Dr. Dawn Wright, who was the first African-American female to dive to the ocean floor. We also have Allison Fundis, who has led or participated in over 50 expeditions across the globe, and Dr. Carly Weiner, who has over 13 years of experience in marine science communications. It's going to be an awesome webinar moderated by the great Emmy Award-winning journalist Val Zavala. I'll put the link to sign up in the chat shortly. Then the next day on October 10th, Alta Sea is hosting something LA hasn't really seen before called the Blue Hour, which is a drive-in experience at the Port of Los Angeles on October 10th from 6 to 8:30 p.m. Alta Sea will be giving their first ever awards to ocean innovators and explorers who have paved the way and inspired the new and next generation of ocean innovators. This includes Dr. Robert Ballard, one of the most accomplished deep sea explorers in the world. He's best known for his discoveries of the sunken RMS Titanic, the German battleship Bismarck, and numerous other shipwrecks. He also found deep sea hydrothermal vents in surrounding biology communities based on chemosynthesis, which he claims was his proudest discovery. Our guest today will speak in more depth, forgive the pun, about one of the most prolific deep sea explorers in history. Also honored will be Dr. Dawn Wright, who will be the panelist on the October 9th webinar. So, also we got the world famous opera director, Peter Sellers. He will be debuting a portion of his production of Mozart's Idomeneo. Then the night will conclude with a special one night only commissioned art installation by Annie Sperling and Mason Rothschild in collaboration with world-renowned artist Rafiq Anadol. The installation will be projected over the USS Iowa, which Mike is currently on right now. Tickets are on sale on our website, which I will put in the chat shortly. Now to the main event, Mike Getscher. Mike is the Battleship Iowa's Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer and the Lost at Sea Museum's project manager. And today we'll be talking about how exactly they turned this 75-year-old battleship into a modern exhibit. He's got an amazing background and we're excited he could join us today. So Mike, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacob, appreciate that. And thank you, you to Alta Sea as well for inviting me to do this. I have the coolest office in the world here. I'm sitting aboard a battleship from World War II. Very, very nice environment. And out here in the door is the harbor. So it's a really neat place to be. Really appreciate being here, in fact, and it's been 9 years aboard the ship for me. And with that, I'm going to start. We're going to talk about Lost at Sea, and let me do the share screen thing. And the first thing I'm going to do is from the beginning here. Hang on a second. It is not working the way I want it to work. There it is. Perfect. Everybody can see that now?
Your screen isn't shared right now.
Yeah, just there it was. All right. There you go. Sorry about that. Once again, thanks to Alta Sea, also to Confidence Foundation, who helped fund the exhibit. And of course, the Ocean Exploration Trust, which is the vehicle by which Dr. Ballard is doing his work now, the Port of Los Angeles, and of course, Dr. Bob himself. We call him Bob. Great guy. Really enjoyed working with him on this exhibit. And with that, I'm going to go into just a brief little video that gives you an overview of the exhibit. This was created for our submission to the Themed Entertainment Association. So this is for all of you here. All right. Hello, I'm Mike Getscher, Executive Vice President, Chief Operating Officer of Battleship Iowa Museum in San Pedro, California. We are pleased to submit our latest exhibit, Lost at Sea, to the THEA Award Selection Committee. Lost at Sea is based on the work of renowned undersea explorer Dr. Robert Ballard. It features a number of his discoveries and explorations of shipwrecks lost during a time of war, specifically World War I, World War II, and the Cold War era.
During any naval battle, the danger of sinking is real.
This exhibit features my expeditions to some of the most significant shipwrecks that occurred during a time of war. We're presenting not only the expeditions, but the historical context of each incident. But for all the glory and excitement that is presented in our program, we should not lose sight of the significant human toll of those lost at sea.
So that's a basic intro. And then before going any further, I'm going to share with you a little bit of my background, which is a little unique. First thing I did after high school was I went to Long Beach City College and picked up an Associate of Science in Diesel Technology. And then after a couple of years of working in that field, I went to Cal State Long Beach. I put myself through school, picked up a mechanical engineering degree. And while I was there, I also stumbled into a really wonderful job with the Ocean Science Institute at Cal State Long Beach. And this is the research vessel Yellowfin, which is owned by Cal State. And I was able to work on that vessel for a number of years doing undergraduate research, graduate research, and even some support work for the Department of Fish and Game in California. In fact, I was part of an expedition where we were tagging marlin and following them down to the Mexican border. So really a fascinating job that I had while going to school. And from that position, I met some folks at USC, at the Hancock Institute for Marine Studies. And here is the USC research vessel at the time, 220 feet. Aboard this vessel, I ended up doing a Trans-Pacific and spending several months in the Western Pacific. Here's a shot of us about 200 miles north of Bougainville, north of the Solomons, doing National Science Foundation work. Absolutely fascinating stuff. Really enjoyed that time. I spent almost 6 years at Hancock Institute, and that's me hanging off the side with somebody from the Max Planck Institute. A lot of this research here was all weather related, and that big ball on top of the vessel was a Doppler radar just for analyzing weather related atmospheric conditions. So that was really cool. I had kind of an odd year after that. I worked on the railroad, the Santa Fe. Just hard to explain that one, really. Although a lot of the technology from the marine community also works in the railroad world. And then I was given the opportunity to go back to sea, which I took immediately. I worked for Science Applications International Corporation. This particular portion of it we used to call AFAB Marine, anything for a buck. This image right here on the upper left is of the vessel in Cartagena, Spain. We hauled it out for American Bureau of Shipping inspection, and there's me there on the propeller. And then later on, I spent some time on a similar vessel doing underwater cable laying. This is a different vessel, but I'm very familiar with this technology. I've launched and recovered 30,000-pound plows like the one in the lower left and towed them behind us at 5 and 6 knots in 5,000 feet of water doing this underwater cable laying and burying. And you can see on the lower right picture kind of what we were doing. This is a great job. I got about 1,000 days of sea time on that. Just a wonderful experience. I spent a year in the Mediterranean, a year in the Gulf, and did a couple of transatlantics besides. So really a great job for me. But I came home from sea to work at the Aquarium of the Pacific. I was there the day that we opened in 1998. I ended up leaving there as the director of engineering. That also was a wonderful job. This is a great shot of the lobby. I was there the night that we raised that sculpture of the blue whale. It is 88 feet long, but it only weighs about 8,000 pounds. Great experience there. And just, I cannot tell you how great it was. And I'm still friends with all the people there as well. Then I went off to spend 6 years in thermal storage. It's green energy. This is basically for air conditioning to drop the load on the electric grid. So that was a wonderful position to be in as well. And then this battleship poked into my life. And it's kind of hard to describe. Why would I end up on a battleship? There I am in front of the big guns in front. And the story is that my dad was a battleship sailor in World War II. And that is his ship down there in Fall River, Massachusetts. It was the USS Massachusetts. And I grew up with the wonderful stories from him. Great image of my mom and my dad before I lost him back in 1995. So a lot of great heritage there in my family. And my son is now a naval officer too. So we have a third generation of maritime in our life. So here it was back in 2011. That is the ship in Sassoon Bay up near San Francisco. She looked pretty poor. She'd been in mothballs for more than 20 years and not in the greatest shape, at least on the surface. Basically her hull and everything's in great shape. So that's all good. But We took her over to Richmond and spent $2.5 million on her, cleaned her up. Just an amazing experience for all of us. We lived aboard the vessel, and we created what is now a museum ship in San Pedro, California. And that's the story, now 9 years later for me. So Lost at Sea began with a conversation. The CEO of my organization here and the executive director of Alta Sea were having dinner one night. They chatted about some of the ideas that Bob Ballard had suggested to Alta Sea. He had some exhibit thoughts, and Alta Sea was really not in a position to be doing that at the moment. So she shared it with my boss, and they agreed to hook us up with Dr. Ballard. And he had some ideas. In fact, he had a lot of ideas about what it might be, and he shared most of that in a PowerPoint. And this is one of the images. Of course, when you look at Bob's career, everybody thinks about what he's done with the Titanic, but his background is really geology and chemistry and geophysics. He's an exploration guy, really, as an aside to that. So he's done a lot of other work, and so that's why he thought it might appeal to Alta Sea. But in fact, he also wanted to share his explorations. So he gave us just this simple list. It's actually 2 pages of all of the different expeditions he's been a part of over time. And he called it War at Sea. And through a conversation with Bob down in our museum one day, he talked about how they were lost at sea, and that's literally how the name came about. So that's how that started, with a couple of meetings with Bob, a few phone calls. But before we get too much further, we had the vision process that we had to go through. This is called a design charrette, where we decide what is important for us as an exhibit. We wanted to have accuracy, we wanted to have innovation, we wanted it to be very aggressive, and we wanted to educate our visitors. We wanted it to be really correct in every way. We also wanted to have the right ethos behind it, and that is in fact something that Bob shared with us in one of his interviews, and here that is.
You never go to Gettysburg with a shovel, and you don't take belt buckles off the Arizona. These are sites that are very treasured by American history and should be respected accordingly.
So we love that, and we embrace that as really our ethos as well. This is an exhibit about the loss of vessels, and if you think about it, and you go through the history, it represents almost 10,000 lives lost through time. So very important for us to get that correct. So we revised our list. We started to do it a little bit differently, more chronological. From the top, the Lusitania, which was sunk in 1915, the Britannic in 16, 1 year later, and so forth down through what we call the Cold War with the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion. Now, during this design process, we had kind of a cool visit. Bob is friends with James Cameron. I would think most people know him as the filmmaker who made the movie Titanic. He also did Avatar. He's done other films as well. He was part of Terminators, I believe. So really cool guy. And Bob brought him up to the ship one day for some social time. And we were standing up on top of the turret, which is just a great experience for us. What some people don't know about Jim is that he's actually a great explorer in his own right. He has dove to the Challenger Deep, to the bottom of the Marianas Trench with his own submarine. And he's also done explorations of both Titanic and Bismarck, the German battleship that was lost in 1941. While we were standing on top of this turret, he was looking at me, he says, you know, this turret is bigger than the Bismarck turrets. And it struck me that I was standing there with 2 of the great explorers of our time, and probably the only 2 men in the world who could actually comment on that, specifically having seen the turret, at least one of the turrets from the Bismarck. So really cool experience, and Jim was a great guy. I really enjoyed the time we had with that. So we have our ideas, and we have this really big ship, but we have some challenges too. That is an image of the ship. She is 887 feet long, so almost 3 football fields. She's over 215 feet tall from the bottom of her keel to the top. She has 19 decks and over 400,000 square feet. But we're going to focus on an area to the left of that image on the 3rd deck. And you can see the main deck is where the turret is at the top. The next one down is the 2nd deck, and the next one down below that is 3rd deck. The green area is the area for the exhibit. The yellow area was for an extended tour opportunity that we had as part of this build out. So that was the basic, at least looking through the ship and what it would look like there. This is looking down from above as if you had x-ray vision. You can see that the 2,500 square foot area there in the yellow zone to the right is where the main exhibit was. The blue area in the middle was expanded exhibit space for entry and exit and for a theater. And then the little portion to the left is an art gallery that we created at the same time. So very cool. So designing is kind of funny. You know, first thing you do often is create some artist sketches, and that's no different for us. You can see on the upper left picture here that we had an artist, Linda, one of our volunteers, who threw together some of her ideas for what some of the entry spaces would look like. And then as you look at the lower right, that's literally just a whiteboard sketch from me as we talked about how we might align all of our spaces and provide that guest path for people to go through and really see what it was like. And it sounds really simple, but that's often what you do. And then that ultimately segues into a more formal look. And this is in fact what you have. You start in the upper middle there where it says 971 square feet in the berthing exhibit, and you go through the exhibit space to the right and back through the Discovery Center and out the back end there to the left. So that's really what you do. Now, in addition to doing this architectural design, we also have to do other things such as lighting design, and we hired somebody professional in the artistic world to do that because we're not experts in that. You can see that all these little colored marks on the drawing there are actually different types of lights, whether it's a wide flood or an accent light or whatever it might be. So that was really important to do, and we really wanted to elevate our experience and do a really nice job with that. And then we, of course, had to do the boring stuff too, which is fire systems. This is a fire sprinkler drawing. We also did fire alarms, and we did some other infrastructure that I won't bore you with. But that was kind of the cool stuff that I had to do as part of being the engineer and the architect for the exhibit. So we have this kind of big space, but not really big space. The area that we were looking at is down below on third deck. It's a berthing space or bunks. You can see the bunks to the left. They're stacked 3 high. I think in the area we had nearly 400 bunks. And we decided long ago that we were not going to share too many berthing spaces with our guests because they're pretty boring after a while. But we had to do something in that area anyway. So we decided to work on ripping those out. You can see on the right picture there too that we had some other obstacles, whether there's lockers, there's hatches, holes in the deck, there's columns, really an awful lot to really think about. And with that, we dove off into demolition. The image on the upper left, we have a volunteer cutting out a door and a step, an awful lot of work to do. And the image on the lower right, you can see the mess as we removed those 400 bunks in the area. An awful lot of work went into that. In fact, it took us almost a year to finish the demolition. Really an awful lot of work. But before we go too much further, I want to remind everybody that crew members lived here. In fact, they lived here over the course of 3 different commissionings from World War II, Korean War, and what we call the Cold War. And so we found a lot of artifacts, and these are kind of some of them. A few of them are kind of silly almost. There's a ton of combs. We found combs everywhere, and also a lot of pencils and pens and so forth. I challenge our younger viewers to tell me what the square black thing is in the lower left. Of course, it's a floppy disk. And we had a handful of other more personal items there. There's some dog tags, there's some insignia, knives, and all kinds of little silly things. We really save this stuff as part of the history of the ship. It becomes part of the curatorial collection of the vessel. This is part of our history, and we retain that. We don't want to just lose that. We don't just discard it. It doesn't go into the trash. And I might add, too, that there's some more poignant things here that we find. These are letters from home. In this particular case, what we would call a Dear John letter, where a girlfriend is breaking up with her boyfriend aboard the ship. So kind of sad. But this, once again, is part of the history of the vessel and something that we really, it's really important to us to keep and retain. So now that we've gotten the decks cleared, an awful lot of open space there, you can see, though, that we want to retain the look of the ship, and we kind of have to. On the right-hand lower picture there, the left wall is a 10-inch piece of armor. It's not going anywhere. And then the deck in front of you there is 6 inches thick. So we really can't do a lot about some things. We leave the columns, we leave some of the fans and the transforms and so forth. And we want to work around that and retain the integrity of what the ship really is. Here's another view of some of those other spaces on the starboard side of the ship. And in the lower right image, there's a couple of really important features for me. One is that pipe back there that says CHT. That's actually one of our sewage drains from our toilets. So we obviously need to keep some of that infrastructure in place. And then those 3 things on the deck, those kind of hatch things with a lot of bolts on them, those are access points for tanks that we might need to get into in the future. So we have to work around all of those features when we're designing a space inside the ship. And with that, we start building out, not too dissimilar from what we would call a tenant improvement on a building, or even building out a room inside of a house. We use slightly different materials of steel studs to keep down the fire danger, but we do put up different types of boards on it to cover it up and be able to paint. Really kind of typical construction, and no surprise to someone who's built out a museum space before, but very fun to do. Almost entirely done with the staff here aboard ship, by the way. On the upper left area, I was the one that assembled those and welded them to the deck, so that was really fun for me. I do a lot of things like that in addition to my other duties. And those cases to the lower right are for the models that were part of the exhibit as well. So with that, we're going to go into the exhibit. When we enter the exhibit, we want to create a sense of immersion where you're going back in time and starting somewhere different. And so we did that here. You can see where people are entering at the Lost at Sea on the right picture, and then you're immersed into this older version of the ship where you have hammocks in the background. And it's kind of a little vignette. It's a little story in and of itself. And then, of course, you have not only the hammocks, but also the sea bags, and my name is on that front sea bag there. And then Bob welcomes you to the exhibit, so that was really kind of fun. He was very helpful when it came to that. And then we go through each one of the exhibits, and what we do is show some of the artifacts, nothing taken from underwater, per that ethos that we talked about, but really other artifacts that survived the ship in some other form, where there was a plate from the Lusitania or some other feature. We found things like that out in the world, and we're able to bring them here. And then what we did was show video from the time and also video from the expeditions, trying to juxtapose those two things. We also got some great art. Those images on the upper right are from Ken Marshall, who is an artist who has worked with Bob Ballard quite a bit, including the Titanic, of course, and the Bismarck. We go into the Bismarck and of course HMS Hood, which is a part of that story, very sad story, frankly. Beautiful models that were built by volunteers. These were donated to the ship. They're just absolutely stunning. They're gorgeous, gorgeous models. And of course you can see the nice lighting and how well it's done. I had fun building the periscope there in front of you as you move into the U-boat exhibit. And the periscope kind of works. It doesn't look up above, but there's a nice little screen inside in that back box, and really fun. We wanted to engage our younger visitors, and you can see that here as they learn what it would look like to potentially sink a ship from a U-boat. And with that, we're going to show a little bit of video from the Ocean Exploration Trust and Dr. Ballard, and this is about a 2-minute video.
Come up, Todd, to 20 meters.
20 meters.
So wonderful video, very cool. We try to do that as much as we could throughout the exhibit. From there, you go into what we call War in the Pacific, in this particular case, Guadalcanal. Interestingly, I've been to Guadalcanal, in fact, and I've been around Savo Island where Dr. Ballard has done a lot of his work. So it's very fascinating for me to be able to do an exhibit in that arena. And then the last exhibit in the space was the Cold War era. We have this great full screen video of a submarine. This is a very sad story of the loss of these two nuclear submarines, the Thresher and the Scorpion. And for me, it's even more poignant now because my son is going into the submarine service. So I think about this quite a bit, frankly. Very, very cool experience. And then we finish up the main exhibit portion with this kind of a bookend to that first space where you walked in, you saw the sea bags and the hammocks. This is more of the sunken wreck bookend to that. And this was all done in-house. There's some great tech in here. One of our people even made the ROV. It's really an amazing effort on the part of our crew here. And by the way, it represented well over 15,000 hours of volunteer time to build this exhibit back over the course of a year and a half or so. So really nice. And then we finish out the exhibit with the technology, the current work. You can see there on the kind of the middle left, research ship Nautilus, which is Bob's current vessel through Ocean Exploration Trust. We have a great video there with some launching and so forth. And then of course we go over to the right, and his most recent expedition when we first talked to him had been the USS Independence, which was sunk off of the coast of San Francisco. During one of their expeditions, they had this really cool encounter that I wanted to share with you too. Once again, a couple of minute video. An Ocean Exploration Trust, Alison Fundis, by the way, who you'll have on one of your talks here soon. She shared this with us and it was very cool.
Incredible set of discoveries here, along with just being able to witness this piece of American history.
A super sampler is... Yes. The heck is that?
Oh my god.
Oh my goodness, what is that?
Guys, look at it.
Guys, we have a humpback whale.
We need to...
he's gonna bump you.
Zoom out on our...
Wow.
Awesome.
Oh, wow.
Video's coming back.
There he is. There he is.
Oh, wow, look, you can see him in
there he is.
Herc's camera. Can we move the Herc cam a little bit?
That's as far as I can go.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, wow.
Holy cow.
Wow. He's just doing laps.
Take a look.
Moving up.
I'm moving up and I'm moving.
Coming right. He's gonna look at you now. There he is. You can see the eye. See the eye?
Count as a selfie?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Nice view. Just trying to figure us out.
Incredible.
Yeah, this is amazing.
Justin, you want the reds off?
Look at that view. I hope we're getting screen captures of this.
I have not stopped. If you want to move the white
twirling. He's twirling, coming around.
Yeah, I'll twirl
He's
it.
checking out the bottom, coming.
He's going to sniff the bottom. Here he comes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that was a very cool encounter. That was in fact a sperm whale. I don't know who thought it was a right whale. I think it was. So I wanted to revisit just a little bit. In addition to all this exhibitry that we did on the right side of your screen in that image, you can see the exhibit hall to the right, and there's the art gallery there, virtual reality space. We also expanded our tour path, and it involves showing about another 5,000 square feet of space. The ship is really kind of like a city, and you need to have all the aspects of a city. You need to have a print shop, which is like your newspaper. You had to have laundry. We have our own barber shop. We had our own tailor shop. And we also had a brig or a jail. And Bob was kind enough to hop in the jail for us one day. And we had a great time with him. He really is an interesting guy and very engaging. And we just had a blast aboard the ship. And there I am with him as we concluded the opening of the exhibit. Had a great time. He invited us to several meetings. We've been out to Washington, D.C. to talk about his future explorations. Really enjoyed all of that time. Office of Naval Research is involved, Navy Foundation, Nat Geo, NOAA. There's a bunch of organizations, and really enjoyed our time with Bob across the board. And I think that's what I have right now. So I'm stopping the share, and I think there might be some questions. Jacob, if you can come back.
Hey, thank you so much, Mike. This was awesome. So yeah, we have one right off the bat, and feel free if anyone has any questions to ask them in the Q&A function or the chat if you want. Q&A function is a little easier, but to each their own. So Jeremy asks, is there a dream project that you would want to do this for, and kind of can you tell us how, I guess what intrigued you with the ocean in general? That's kind of a vague question, but.
Well, yeah, I think there's a couple of layers there too. For one thing, I grew up enjoying the National Geographic magazines. I really just loved that, and early explorations were done there. And I used to have a few of the National Geographic TV shows that were very special coming on. And then as I kind of wandered through that early part of my academic career, stumbling into these opportunities with the research vessels is really how I really became focused on that, realizing that my talents lie in engineering and mechanics. But there was roles aboard those ships with that, and that was what was really exciting for me to get into. So I really enjoyed that aspect of my life. I've now been in nonprofits though, I think this is my 22nd year between the Aquarium, Hancock Institute, and of course 9 years here. So I've ended up kind of folding into the nonprofit world. If you're talking about another exhibit, you know, we're excited about what this does. We realize that ships are kind of awkward to present as a museum. You can wander through the ship and it's interesting to a point, but how many bunks can you show people before they're bored to tears? And so over a course of time and conversations and some visits to other ships, we realized that we could in fact expand our exhibit space and do different things aboard the ship by doing what we did here. So this is the model for our future. We're looking, in fact, we're just becoming now the National Museum of the Surface Navy. The Surface Navy are all those vessels associated with the surface actions. So it would not include submarines, of course, under the water. It doesn't really include aircraft carriers, but everything else. And the Battleship Iowa is the epitome of a surface Navy ship. So we've worked with the Navy, and we are now doing what is really a much broader scope of work. And we're going to expand our museum with more than 20,000 square feet, treated much like we've done here in the coming years, where we can really do a special thing and talk about the history of the surface Navy dating back well over 200 years up to now. Once again, one of the great humanitarian forces in the world too, the surface Navy, which is often lost. So we have a lot of opportunity with that. Happy to share that too. So that's my next exciting thing to do. And we're just now fundraising for it. So we have a ways to go.
Awesome. So we actually have, we were talking about this a little earlier before the chat, but we had some questions about the ship itself that you're on. It's so Mary asked, when was the ship built? Who built it? When was it commissioned? How long in the Pacific? And then she asked about the tour, but we can get to that right after.
Sure. So I'll try to remember all of it. Laid down in 1940, launched in, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this one, I think 41, and commissioned first in 1943. She was designed in the 1930s. So really, I always think about this too. People with pencils and slide rules designed this incredible vessel. So that's really cool. Once again, commissioned in 1943. The first thing she did, though, was to spend time in the Atlantic. She did two things. One was she stood the Tirpitz watch, trying to make sure that the sister ship to the Bismarck, which we just touched upon, was in fact holed up there in the fjords of Norway. And then secondly, and I think most importantly to our history here, she took Franklin Delano Roosevelt, our president, over to Mirza Kabir for the Tehran conference with Churchill and Stalin. So we were Air Force One for a time. And then after that, she kind of rearmed and fixed up a little bit, then went to the Pacific, and she spent only the last year and a half-ish in the Pacific War. She was next to the USS Missouri when the surrender was signed. In fact, the Iowa was the radio ship. But of course, President Truman at the time, having lost FDR a year earlier, was from Missouri. So the Missouri, you know, she gets the glory for the surrender, and that's all good. We have friends over there too. So that's really the basic history for that first part of her life. She decommissioned late in the 40s. She recommissioned again for the Korean War, and in fact, fired more rounds through her guns during the Korean War than she did during World War II. She kind of came late to World War II. She was in commission until 1958, and then during the Navy buildup in the 1980s, President Reagan brought her back along with the other Iowa-class battleships. So she was recommissioned in 1984 and then decommissioned again in 1990. So she had this on and off 50-year service life with the Navy. And then she was donated to the Pacific Battleship Center. And having a ship donated to you is not an easy thing. It's quite a process you have to go through, proving that you have the money, the wherewithal, the understanding, a good business plan. And it took a number of years to get to that point. And she was donated on September 6th of 2011. I was either the first or second person that my boss called. So I think, does that answer all? I think all of that, I think it does.
Yeah, essentially.
And then tours available with COVID. So right now we fall under the LA County Health Department rules. So we are an outdoor museum only. There's actually quite a bit to see with an outdoor exhibit. We still have 5 decks to go through and you know, tens of thousands of square feet. So quite a bit to experience coming down here. And of course we have all the protocols in place, masks required, cleaning. It's very extensive, and we're very careful with all of that. It's very important to us to be a safe location for people to come. So that's what we're doing. And we hope to be able to reopen again to indoor museums once we switch from Tier 1 to Tier 2 in LA County. We have to follow LA County guidelines. The state sets some standards, and then the county health department actually issues the rules. And they have the force of law behind them, and they can issue citations and so forth. But we're good. We have a lot of protocols in place. And we've trained, in fact, nearly 200 people of our staff just to be able to make sure and do this right.
So that goes to another question Mary had, which was, so your staff, how many people are on board to maintain the exhibits and the ship? She asked, is there a mold issue, earthquake issues?
It's a pretty light staff. What's amazing here is that we operate the vessel with maybe about 15 full-time people and 35 part-time people. Sadly, due to COVID, all of those part-time people are essentially gone. We're down to about 15 or 16 crew members here. But the wondrous thing here is that we have 500 volunteers aboard the ship that are deeply passionate about the vessel. And it's reflected in that 15,000 hours of time spent on Lost at Sea. So people are really passionate. Our tour staff, we have operations staff that help maintain the vessel. It's an extraordinary crew, and really an amazing thing for me to experience here for the last 9 years.
That's awesome. Okay, gosh, coming in. So kind of about the tours. So Lisa asks, how many students are visiting each year, obviously pre-COVID? And is there a curriculum attached so that they can learn a little about the ship in advance to their visit?
So right now we have 0 students, as you can imagine. In fact, the national debate and the local debate about getting kids back to school is a real challenge. So we don't anticipate having any children here at all. We do have digital programs that are available, and we're growing that and working very hard on that right now. We just have a handful, and if you'd like it, you can reach out to me through whatever form that you do with Jacob, and I can let you know. There's things going up on our website here shortly. So we're really anxious to do that. And I think, does that answer that too? We don't really have a lot of students right now. I think the most we had one year is 12 or 14,000 students. So pretty cool. We had a program with LAUSD, which was very fun. Really kind of a big science platform, a STEM platform. We talk about floating. How do you float a 45,000 ton displacement vessel?
Yeah.
It's kind of confusing for most people. We have mechanical advantage. The place is a big STEM jungle gym, so we really enjoy that.
That's awesome. So that kind of goes into Ryan's question, which talks about older students. Do you work with any local undergrad or graduate school programs for students to get involved in your operations, either on a part-time or a volunteer basis?
No, we don't really have anything right now for students, I guess. We have volunteer opportunities, of course. I mean, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities, but we haven't worked in any formal way with some of the other ones, like the universities or some of the tech schools. We've talked to them. It's never really worked out, and we have limited staff anyway, so it'd be kind of a challenge, but we've worked a little bit with them and nothing's really come of it. But we have a ton of volunteer opportunities, and just because you're not a Navy veteran doesn't mean we don't want to see you down here. In fact, I would say half of our staff at least is non-Navy or non-military. I don't have a military background. I have a merchant marine background, which is different. So there's always opportunity here, and we'd be glad to work with a university or some of their undergrad or graduate work as well.
Right on. So question that Jerry asked that I think is interesting, given what we were talking about before the chat, which was, you're not a building, you're not technically a ship. So Jerry asked, now that you're the guardians of the Iowa, are there environmental standards that concern your team regarding sustaining the stability and health of the ship?
Sure. So a couple things. The ship was donated to us, but as part of that, we have a contract with the Navy, and we had to have an EPA contract with the Environmental Protection Agency. And so they monitor at least one aspect of our world. When we first received the ship, we had the ship tested for airborne lead, asbestos, PCBs, and also did wipe tests throughout the entire ship. Very, very extensive testing. And the Navy had done a lot of cleanup before then. For example, I do have asbestos aboard the ship, but it's all encapsulated. So the concerns are, don't disturb that. And it's very typical, even just for an older building. If you have a 75-year-old building in downtown LA, you're likely to have the same restrictions, if you will. And we do annual testing as well. We work with the EPA. We have to. We're required by our contract. So we're happy to do that. We make sure and train our staff. We have a lot of safety training here. I have 2 rules on the ship, kind of half joking, half serious: don't lick the walls and don't chew the asbestos. And that's really what I tell people. And just leave things alone and you're fine. All the white paint you see around me is new. It's been painted since the 1980s. So we just leave things alone and work with it as we should. It's often more looked at as an industrial environment than it is anything super special with respect to paint and so forth, or asbestos even. I've done that all my life in my industrial career. So very, very common for me.
Gotcha. So you might have covered this a little bit earlier when you're talking about what other exhibits. So Michael asks, I understand that the Iowa has been designated as the U.S. Navy Museum. Is that correct? And if so, what does that mean for the Iowa?
So it's a little different. The Navy will hold certain vessels in reserve for possible museum use. And in fact, the Iowa was, of course, one that was. I think there's more than 40 vessels that were owned at one point by the Navy, which are now museums. Many of them are there's 8 battleships now. There's a number of aircraft carriers, the Midway in San Diego, the Hornet up in Alameda. Of course, on the East Coast, you have the North Carolina and so forth. So it's very common to have these things kept as memorials, retained as museums, and the Navy will donate the vessel to you. Once again, if you're an organization, a nonprofit, and you're going to maintain it in a certain physical condition, and you're going to honor the ships and not insult the Navy, basically, you can essentially have this vessel. But once again, getting there is very difficult. It takes some real money. The state of Iowa donated $3 million to whomever received the ship. And that was the seed money for the vessel and for the museum. So we do own the vessel, which is really odd to most people. How can you own a battleship? But there's a funny part of the contract that says that if the Navy wants it back, they can take it back at any time. And so, and they don't, because she's 75 years old and she uses fuel at a prodigious rate and very expensive to operate. But, and she's antiquated too in many ways. But still, there's that part of the contract. So I think that answers that as best I could.
Yeah. How many gallons again does it hold of?
So just under 2.5 million gallons of fuel. Basically a diesel fuel. It's called DFM. She had boilers, and what's amazing is at full speed, and this thing can do almost 40 miles an hour. At full load displacement of 58,000 tons, it can do 40 miles an hour. That's a lot of horsepower, but it will burn through all of its fuel in about 5 or 6 days, if it can keep everything running. So you don't normally run it at that speed for very long because it's hard on the engines, it's hard on the ship, but you could, in theory, do that. And she uses a ton of fuel.
That's a ridiculous number.
It's an amazing amount of fuel.
Yeah,
it really is.
All right, you kind of touched on the history. So Mary asked, do people write books on the great history of the ship, and any references to any good books that you've seen on the ship? And also, what is the highest rank of the ship's history?
So first off, there's a lot of history that's been written. I think the things that come to mind more recently are there's been some great exploration of the FDR timeframe. What's really interesting to me is that when FDR came back to the ship after their conference with Stalin and Churchill, there's no question, and it is documented, that the first formal conversations about the invasion of Normandy, at D-Day, were being held aboard the ship not 200 feet from where I'm sitting. They sat around the table and started to chew through how would we do this, because all of the major figures of American history at that time were here. George C. Marshall, all of the admirals, the generals, and everything. Hap Arnold, he learned how to fly from Orville and Wilbur Wright. There's some amazing history here. So there's some cool new books on some of that's been documented. You can do a simple Google search and find things. Don't trust Wikipedia, please. There's some good things there, but not all the best. Almost too many books to really comment on. There's some other more technical books that I think I have one right here. The one that I really like, if you truly want to learn about the technical world, is this one by Bob Sumrall and Tom Walkowiak. Long out of print, but it's just a great little Bible for us. It has a tremendous amount of the technical, and since I'm an engineer, I work a lot on the technical, and I need to. but it's also got some good history in it, but too many books to list. So do a Google search, look up some of that FDR history. It's really fascinating, and really important things occurred aboard this vessel.
Awesome. So this is, I'm not sure if this will make sense to you. It doesn't make sense to me because I'm not in the ship world, but Ty asks, why was the wheelhouse not added to the highly armored bridge in World War II? I'm not sure.
So I'll comment on how the Iowa was designed. The Navy had an all or nothing armored point of view. They wanted to protect the guts of the ship. So think about a police officer who has body armor and potentially a helmet. And so they had this armored box around her machinery, around her munitions, and it basically goes from the forward end of turret 1, up front, to the after end of turret 3. But they also want to protect the head, and that's what the helmet is. So they have the communication trunks that go all the way up into the higher reaches of the vessel. And then they have what's called the armored conning tower, which is where you steer the vessel from. And it's frankly kind of awkward because you're literally inside of a pillbox that is 16 inches thick of steel. But the idea was that they wanted to be able to protect, once again, the head, the captain, the people driving the vessel. They wanted to protect your main machinery. You could be hit in the bow, you could be hit in the stern, you could be hit elsewhere, but the ship itself was protected at its core, once again, just like a police officer with a bulletproof vest. And so there's also compromises in design that they had. At some point you run into weight problems or space problems. As big as the ship is, they were trying to do so much and add so many things to the vessel that they really just couldn't put an exterior conning station on the ship. And so there's that compromise, and they did multiple iterations. So it's kind of complicated. But yeah, we have a big kind of a pillbox up there. It's got like a bank vault door that you walk into where the ship is steered from, and you can barely see outside because you're looking through little slits. And in fact, I was aboard the New Jersey, a sister ship, many years ago when it was at sea for a day, and the officers were just yelling in through the slits, come left to, 230 degrees or whatever it might be, because they couldn't see. it was kind of interesting. So, but once again, it was all about protection. And it was, what I think of it this way: the ship was meant to be in a gunfight. That's it. A 2,700-pound projectile coming at you at 2,500 feet per second will do a tremendous amount of damage just from kinetic energy alone. And to protect all of that is really the main purpose of all of that. I think that answers that too, I hope.
Yeah, that was a great answer. So Jerry asks, similar to the history, how many USA World War II era battleships or destroyers still exist in the world?
So in the world, first off, I'll start in America. And let me back up for a moment. Battleship is a specific term. And many people don't understand that. They think of anything with guns that's gray as a battleship. That's not true. A battleship is the end-all be-all of a gunfighter in the surface Navy. And right now in America, there are 8 battleships that have survived. All 4 of the Iowa class have survived. The USS North Carolina, which is only a 2-ship class, dating back to it was actually 2 classes before, that survived in Wilmington. There are 2 of the South Dakota class battleships, including the one my dad served on, that have survived. And of course the 4 Iowas and the Texas. The Texas is unique though. She served in World War I. And she really represents almost a full generation back of design philosophy and construction philosophy. And she's got some real challenges right now in leaking of her hull, in pretty bad shape. And I talked to Travis, he's my friend down there on the Texas, and they're working on getting her fixed up. But so those are the 8 battleships in America. I think there's a couple of ships that were saved. The Mikasa, largely gutted, is in Japan. Now that is a early 1900s pre-dreadnought era battleship. And I think there's one other overseas somewhere that's considered a battleship, and I can't remember the name. You have to be careful once again with that moniker. Is it just a cruiser? Is it a destroyer or whatever? It's kind of hard to really define it sometimes for some folks. As far as destroyers go, I can only think of a handful, 6 or 7 maybe in America. The Laffey, the Kid. I always forget the smaller boys too. They're really cool. The Kid is really cool. That's down in Baton Rouge. There's about a half a dozen or more of World War II destroyers, and then beyond that, I have to look at other nations and see what they have.
Gotcha. Okay, let me see. Got a couple more. So Ryan asked a couple questions on your operations since COVID, especially your plans going forward into the next year. Were there any projects that had to be halted due to the pandemic?
Well, first off, we don't know what the next handful of months really holds for us, right? We're all responding to this in real time, and we're going to maintain all of our standards and protocols. We're going to be working, of course, with the LA County Health Department, hopefully opening our indoor spaces, but we're not going to be expanding much. And a lot of that's driven by a combination of staffing, which we've obviously had to reduce with some 35 layoffs. That's a pretty serious thing. And also with funding. Nonprofits and museums across the entire nation have really taken a very, very hard hit in the revenue. Right now, we're running about 10% on our attendance. We don't have any overnight programs because we can't bring people aboard. We don't have any school programs because they don't want the kids here. And we don't have any, we're just restarting some of our retail opportunity. We can't have an event. People used to rent our space here. So, all of those revenue streams have been shut off with the exception of our gate proceeds keep coming down. And that's once again really limited to about 10 or 11% this last few months. So a lot of those decisions about expanding, changing are all driven by that combination of money and staffing. And it's going to be kind of a hiatus here for the next year or so. We kind of expect, we don't know. Of course, fundraising can change that. There's a lot of different moving pieces to that. But overall, we're slowed down, and that's okay. We're maintaining the ship. We've just painted the fantail, beautifully done. We're repairing things on the O2 level up above my head over here. There's rust. There's always a problem on the ship that you have to address. So she's pretty big and pretty complicated. So we have plenty to do.
So you mentioned donations, and that brings up Mary's question. And I understand you guys have a GoFundMe campaign currently, Operation Crush COVID, if you want to talk about that.
We do, in fact. So go find us on GoFundMe. We have other links on our website, of course. Reach out to us. Donations are a huge portion of what we have right now. We desperately need that. So please, if you would like to support the Battleship, we very much appreciate that. Reach out to us through our website or the GoFundMe or Facebook page and Instagram, I'm sure. I don't follow all the social media stuff, but I know we have it there. So please reach out to us. And even the $25 donation is helpful. We have recurring donation opportunities. We have all kinds of ways in which you can help the vessel. And, once again, we really need it. This is a difficult, year for us, as it is for a lot of folks.
Yeah. And so she also asked about memberships. Do you guys have memberships to your museum in normal years?
So we have the National Museum plank owner arrangement. So once again, it's on our website. We're really focused on that now, moving ahead to the future. And yes, we do. It's a form of membership. So please take a look at that, and you'll find it out there on the website.
Perfect. All right. So we got one question. It's always asked every webinar, regardless of the guest. Our guy, Ryan, every time. It's amazing. I want to thank him for watching every week, but he wants to know, what is your favorite ocean?
It's got to be the Pacific. I was born and raised here. I've been across the Atlantic several times. The Mediterranean was exciting. It's beautiful. It's also some of the most oddly violent water I've been in. I had more 50-knot days in hiding on the vessel in the Mediterranean for an entire 13 months I was there than any other place I've been at. But my time coming across the equator of the Pacific was just amazing. I stopped at Christmas Island. I've been to Guadalcanal. I've been to Kwajalein. And to visit all those places, and just the ocean is just incredible. We were in the middle of the Pacific on the Vickers, that USC research vessel, coming across on the equator for the Central Equatorial Pacific experiment, CPEX. And we had overflights of no aircraft and everything else. And we ran across the school of tuna as far as the eye could see. Big yellowtail, and I have one great image of the one fish that was caught, but just an amazing experience. And so the Pacific is my favorite. And of course, I learned how to scuba dive here off of Catalina, and had a great time. So this is where I've spent my life. But I like the other places. The Med is cool. Been to Malta, spent many months in Italy. Great place to visit. Please go. Would have liked to go to other places. Been to Greece, Spain. Pretty cool time. But and I found out that my second son, my son who's a naval officer, was on the way as I was coming west through the Straits of Gibraltar. True story. I was on the SATCOM with my wife, and that was many years ago now. And now he's at sea, or will be. So kind of a cool thing.
So could you kind of talk on that, because that's kind of interesting. I know you mentioned your father was in the Navy, and now your son is also so. And you were in engineering. Was it just passed down generation to generation? You somehow found your way to the sea, and everyone else did as well?
You know, for me, I think it started with that National Geographic type inspiration, and I was also allowed to go down to the Naval Shipyard in Long Beach when I was in 8th grade. I had to write an essay and win the opportunity, which I did, and those were memorable experiences for me. And then as I went through that academic career once again and kind of stumbled into these opportunities, all of that just kind of came to the surface, and off I went. I was a mechanic initially, then an engineer, and once again put myself through school. It took me 7 years, but I did it. And I was working on that research vessel when I was doing it, which was really exciting. So here I was working on 4,000 horsepower clutches in my senior design class at Cal State Long Beach, and really getting experience already. So that's kind of what happened to me. And after that, it just kind of kept going. I ended up in kind of engineering management, I would say, and leadership positions. Somehow that was translated to my son. I never told him that he should go to sea. In fact, I was frankly surprised when he told me one day when he was 13 years old, I want to go to the Naval Academy. I said, well, okay, you know, and thinking that would maybe happen and maybe not. And when he went back to DC at one point, he introduced himself to some Naval Academy folks. He was put on the mailing list, and then he did really well in high school. He was really good in the sciences, really good in math, and he applied to the academy. He had to apply also to Congress to get a congressional nomination, and he did all this pretty much on his own. He asked me for a few things, you know, some advice on some of his writing, but he was pretty sharp, and he did it all. And next thing I know, we're at home one night, and he gets this amazing phone call from Congressman Lowenthal in Long Beach saying, I've nominated you for the Naval Academy. Shortly after that, of course, we get a letter from the Naval Academy saying, you've been appointed now too. And so he went to the Naval Academy, 4 years, of course, an amazing experience. In the middle of all that, he was running vessels. He's actually been the captain on a 140-foot vessel, not too much smaller than what I've sailed on. They really train them quickly and well. So he's done well. He graduated with a degree in physics with honors, and the Navy sent him on to MIT for he's in physical oceanography master's program, associated actually in some way with Woods Hole and Bob Ballard. And he'll leave there and go into the submarine force. So he'll also have some similarities to some of the work that Bob's done too. He'll be in nuclear power school here in another year. So he's had his own journey. It's really been his too, not just mine. I didn't suggest it. I didn't force him to go anywhere. He did it on his own. So that's really, it's a cool thing to watch though. It's been really, really rewarding for my wife and I.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, we are closing in on 1 o'clock. Do you have any final words, thoughts, inspiration?
You know, inspiration has always been important to me. These little moments you had as a youngster, National Geographic, getting the opportunity to go down to the shipyard, those things that you like really end up being something important to you. And I've managed to continue to follow that. I didn't really have a plan throughout my career, but I've done well. And I've traveled half the world at least and done some really exciting things overseas and here in America. Towing the ship down from San Francisco was an extraordinary experience. You know, we are the last crew in history to anchor a battleship off the coast of California, period, because we had to clean the hull off here. And so it's been an amazing journey. And of course, I've had a passion for nonprofits. So that's kind of, you know, who I am and how I've been here. So inspiration is cool, and follow those things and find out where they lead you. Because I had no clue that I would end up here. No clue at all. So
that's awesome. Well, thank you again for this. This was awesome. The chat, the questions were just amazing. So thank you for that. And I just want to remind everyone about the 2 announcements I made earlier, which is October 9th, big women's exploration and ocean webinar with Dr. Dawn Wright, Allison Fundis, Dr. Carly Wiener. It's going to be great. 10 a.m. at October 9th. Sign up on altasea-project-blue.org. And then our big event is the October 10th Blue Hour, where the art installation will be projected over the ship Mike's on, the USS Iowa. And we'll also be honoring Dr. Bob Ballard for his work, Dr. Dawn Wright for hers. art, opera, awards. What more could you really want? For more details, again, go to altasea-project-blue.org. And we are super excited to see you there. And thanks again for joining us this week. And thank you again, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Love to be here. Really enjoyed it.
Have a great weekend, everyone.